"Ma'am, you look a little lost," he began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone designed to be both charming and commanding. "This isn't exactly the quietest spot in town. Can we help you find the ladies' room, or maybe a cab home?" Captain Phyllis Carter didn't look up. She swirled the whiskey in her glass, watching the light refract through it. The ice clinked softly, a tiny bell tolling in the boisterous room. "I'm not lost, Commander," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "And I'm right where I mean to be." Jensen's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of surprise crossed his face. He hadn't expected the title. He glanced for a ring, saw none. He assumed she'd picked up the rank from a deceased husband, a common affectation among the widows who lingered in the orbit of the base. He decided to double down on his patronizing chivalry. "My apologies," he said, pulling up a chair without asking. "Still, a woman of your experience shouldn't be surrounded by a bunch of roughnecks like us. We can be a bad influence." His teammates chuckled from the bar, watching the show. Jensen was good at this, disarming and dominant all at once. Phyllis finally lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held his without a trace of intimidation. "I've found, Commander," she said slowly, "that the most dangerous things in a room are rarely the loudest." Jensen's smile tightened. This wasn't going as planned. The gentle, confused grandmother he'd expected to patronize was not materializing. He decided to shift tactics, to try and box her in with assumptions. "So, who was he?" Jensen asked, gesturing vaguely. "Your husband. Must have been someone important for you to be so comfortable around the service." "He was a librarian," Phyllis replied without missing a beat. "He liked quiet rooms and the smell of old paper. A good man." The finality in her tone offered no further avenues for that line of questioning. Jensen was now genuinely intrigued and slightly irritated. He was used to being the center of gravity in any room. People, especially civilians, were either awed by him or they were challenges to be overcome. This woman was neither. She was simply observing him. It was like being studied by a hawk. He noticed the small, dark object on the table she was using as a coaster for her sweating glass. It was a piece of metal, dull and featureless on one side. He reached for it. "What's this? Some kind of souvenir?" Her hand moved with surprising speed, not to stop him but to lift her glass. He picked up the metal. It was heavier than it looked, the edges worn smooth with time. He flipped it over. On its surface was a crudely etched image of a lit torch, and beneath it the number 5. There were no unit crests, no official markings. It looked like something made in a machine shop. "Just a good luck charm," Phyllis said, her eyes on the coin in his hand. Jensen scoffed, a soft, dismissive sound. He held it up for his men to see. "Boys, look at this, a challenge coin from the dollar store." Laughter erupted from his team. They all had coins, of course. Heavy, intricate pieces of brass and enamel representing their command, specific operations or fallen comrades. They were earned with blood and sweat. This thing in his hand was an amateurish trinket. "You know, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "these things actually mean something to us. They represent a bond. You can't just buy one and pretend you're part of the club." He set the coin down on the table with a dismissive clink. "It's a dangerous game, pretending to be something you're not, especially around here." He was accusing her of stolen valor, a sin second only to cowardice in their world. The air grew thick with a new kind of tension. The jovial atmosphere had curdled into something uglier. Phyllis remained still, her expression unreadable. She hadn't risen to his bait, and her calm was more unnerving than any angry retort could have been. She simply stared at the coin, now back on the table, as if seeing something else entirely. The crude etching of the torch on the coin seemed to glow under the dim bar lights. For a moment, Phyllis wasn't in the sandpiper's perch. The smell of stale beer and fried onions was replaced by the acrid tang of ozone and spent jet fuel. The rattle of the air conditioner faded, supplanted by the deafening roar of 4 Allison T-56 turboprops fighting against a storm that was trying to tear the sky apart. Her hands, now wrinkled and dotted with age spots, felt the phantom vibration of the yoke, the stick shaker rattling her teeth as the aircraft screamed its protest at being flown 50 feet above a churning, black ocean. The red glow of the cockpit instruments reflected on the face of her young co-pilot, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The coin wasn't a good luck charm. It was a promise, a piece of shrapnel cut from the turbine blade of a C-130 that had limped home from a place that didn't exist on any map, carrying men who were officially ghosts. Back in the bar, an old man who had been quietly nursing a beer at the far end of the counter stood up. He was stooped, his face a roadmap of hard years, but his eyes were sharp. He'd been a master chief in the Navy for 30 years, and he knew the sound of a predator cornering its prey. He'd been watching the interaction with growing unease. He hadn't recognized the woman, but he recognized the type of arrogance on display from the young SEAL commander. It was the kind of pride that came just before a catastrophic fall. He started to walk over, intending to defuse the situation, to tell the young officer to stand down. But then he heard Phyllis speak again, her voice still impossibly calm. "It's not a challenge coin, Commander," she said. "It's a marker." Jensen leaned in, a smug grin on his face. "A marker for what? Your bingo game?" Phyllis finally smiled, but it was a cold, thin thing. "No, for a debt. It means the holder is owed 5 lives. The old Master Chief stopped dead in his tracks. His blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that phrase in 40 years. It was a whisper from a forgotten era, a legend from the birth of the teams, a ghost story told to scare new recruits. A marker for 5 lives. It was tied to a call sign, a pilot, a woman who flew missions no one would ever admit to. He looked closer at the silver-haired woman in the red jacket, at the unyielding set of her jaw, and a name surfaced from the deepest, most classified recesses of his memory. A name he had heard only once, spoken in a hushed, reverent tone by a plank owner of SEAL Team 6 himself. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. He didn't call the base police or the duty officer. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't dialed in a decade, a number that belonged to a retired 4-star admiral living quietly in Virginia, the man who had personally signed the charters for the most clandestine operations of the Cold War. As the phone began to ring, the Master Chief watched Jensen, who was now leaning over the table, his voice low and menacing. "Listen, lady, I think it's time for you to leave. You're making my men uncomfortable with your fairy tales." The old Master Chief prayed the Admiral would pick up, because he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Lieutenant Commander Aries Jensen wasn't just talking to an old woman, he was threatening a monument. The phone clicked on the other end. "Frank, is everything all right?" The voice was old, but the authority in it was undiminished. "Admiral Hayes, sir. It's Kowalski," the Master Chief whispered, turning his back to the room. "Sir, I'm at the Sandpiper's perch off base. You're not going to believe this, but I think she's here." There was a pause. "She? Torch 5, sir." Kowalski breathed. "I think I just found Torch 5. And a young DFGRU commander is about to make the biggest mistake of his entire life." In a quiet study filled with books and naval memorabilia hundreds of miles away, retired Admiral William Hayes sat bolt upright in his leather chair. A name he had buried under 40 years of classified documents and willful forgetting had just been spoken. Torch 5. He felt a jolt, a mix of shock and fierce, protective anger. He looked at the secure, encrypted phone in his hand. "Frank, give me the active line for the Commodore at Naval Special Warfare Command. Now." A minute later, the phone rang on the desk of the on-duty watch officer at the Little Creek headquarters. The officer, a young lieutenant, answered crisply. "NSWC Watch. Lieutenant Miller speaking. This is Admiral Hayes." The voice on the other end crackled with static and fury. "Get me Commodore Davies. I don't care if he's in bed, in the shower, or in a submarine. You get him on this line in the next 60 seconds, or you'll be commanding a buoy in the Aleutian Islands for the rest of your career. Is that understood?" The lieutenant, pale, did as he was told. Within 45 seconds, a very awake and very concerned Commodore was on the line. "Admiral, what's going on?" "What's going on, Sam?" Hayes said, his voice dangerously low. "Is that one of your hotshot team leaders, a Lieutenant Commander Jensen, is currently harassing Captain Phyllis Carter at a civilian establishment? I suggest you rectify this situation with extreme prejudice." Commodore Davies frowned. "Phyllis Carter? Sir, the name isn't familiar." "Then look her up, for God's sake." Hayes roared. "Use your highest clearance. Authorization code Nightfall Omega. The call sign is Torch 5. The Commodore relayed the instructions to the watch officer. The young lieutenant's fingers flew across the keyboard. He accessed the highest-level personnel archives. Most files came up in seconds. This one was different. Firewalls and security warnings flashed across the screen. He entered the authorization code. The system paused. Then a heavily redacted file appeared. "Phyllis M. Carter, Captain, U.S. Navy, retired." The rest was a sea of black ink, but a few words and phrases shone through the redactions like diamonds in coal. "Unit, Special Activities Wing, Aviation, disestablished, primary billet, redacted, Airframe Commander, Direct Action Support, Deployments, redacted, Operation Eagle Claw Support, redacted, Distinguished Flying Cross 4, 1 with V for Valor, Air Medal 12, Meritorious Service Medal." The watch officer's breath hitched. A Navy Cross, for a pilot, A woman. He'd never even heard of the Special Activities Wing. He scrolled down, and a single, unredacted mission note from 1983 caught his eye. Weather, Hurricane Class 3. Visibility 0. Mission, deep infiltration of redacted team. Result, successful insertion. Aircraft sustained heavy damage from ground fire during exfil. Returned to base with all hands safe. Commodore, the lieutenant said, his voice barely a whisper. Sir, you need to see this. Back at the Sandpiper's perch, Jensen had reached the end of his patience. Phyllis Carter's serene indifference was a direct challenge to his authority, to his very identity. He saw her not as a person, but as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. He made his final irrevocable error. He picked up the small metal coin again, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. All right, that's it. I think this conversation is over. He looked her straight in the eye, his own gaze hard as steel. These credentials you're hinting at, these little stories, they're too old to be valid, even if they were true. You probably don't even remember the current procedures for base access. I'm half tempted to call the MPs and have you escorted off for fraudulent wear of a military artifact and impersonating whatever it is you think you are. His threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. He was threatening to humiliate her, to use the very system she had served to punish her. It was the ultimate act of disrespect, an attempt to erase her history and her dignity with a single phone call. Phyllis Carter simply held his gaze. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm appeared in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was pity. You shouldn't have done that, Commander, she said softly. As if her words were a cue, the entire front of the dive bar was suddenly bathed in the blinding white and strobing red and blue of headlights and emergency lights. The low rumble of powerful engines vibrated through the floorboards. Through the grimy windows, the silhouettes of 3 black government SUVs and a base patrol vehicle could be seen pulling up, blocking the street. The bar went silent. Jensen's men froze, their drinks halfway to their lips. They knew that kind of arrival. It wasn't a routine patrol. It was command. It was trouble. The door of the bar swung open with a crash. Standing there, silhouetted against the flashing lights, was the base commander, a full captain with a chest full of ribbons. Behind him stood another man, his face grim, the 4 stripes of a Navy captain gleaming on his collar. This was Commodore Sam Davies, the head of all East Coast SEAL teams. And flanking them were 2 sharp-looking master chiefs and a female commander, her expression a mask of controlled fury. Jensen snapped to attention, his mind racing. What had he done? A bar fight. A noise complaint couldn't bring this level of brass. His heart hammered against his ribs. The officers strode into the bar, their polished boots echoing on the dirty floor. The air crackled with a level of authority that made the SEAL's boisterous energy seem childish and cheap. Commodore Davies's eyes scanned the room, bypassing Jensen and his team completely, and locked onto the old woman in the red jacket. He walked directly to her table. The SEALs watched, utterly bewildered, as their formidable leader came to a halt before the woman Jensen had been tormenting. Commodore Davies drew himself up to his full height, his hand snapped up in a salute so crisp it seemed to slice the air. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice ringing with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Commodore Davies, my deepest and most sincere apologies for the conduct of my men." "There is no excuse, ma'am." Phyllis Carter looked up at him and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "At ease, Commodore." Jensen felt the floor drop out from under him. "Captain?" He stared at the old woman, at her civilian clothes, her gray hair. It was impossible. He looked at his men. Their faces were mirrors of his own shock and dawning horror. The Commodore lowered his salute but remained standing at attention. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon Jensen with the force of a physical blow. "Lieutenant Commander Jensen." "Sir," Jensen choked out. "You asked this woman for her credentials," the Commodore said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Allow me to provide them for you. You are in the presence of Captain Phyllis Torch 5 Carter. She was one of the first women to ever fly for the Naval Special Warfare Community, back when it was a program that didn't officially exist." The entire bar was now silent, every patron and bartender frozen, listening. "In 1983, the Commodore continued, his voice rising, while you were still in diapers, Captain Carter flew a blackout insertion of a SEAL team into hostile territory during a Category 3 hurricane. She flew for 3 hours at 50 feet above the waves in zero visibility. On exfil, her aircraft took heavy machine gun fire to the No. 2 engine. The shrapnel from that strike nearly cut the plane in 2. She wrestled that dying bird for 200 miles, landed it on a carrier with 1 engine out and half her hydraulics gone, and saved the lives of all 12 SEALs and her 4 crewmen. She was awarded the Navy Cross for that action, an action the world still doesn't know happened. He pointed a finger at the worn metal coin on the table. That trinket you were mocking, it was cut from the wreckage of that engine's turbine. It was forged by the very men she saved. And it is more valuable and has been earned with more courage than every challenge coin in this entire building combined. He took a step closer to Jensen, his eyes blazing. This officer trained a generation of special operations aviators. She set the standards for missions that are still doctrine today. She kicked down doors you didn't even know were locked so that women like Commander Reynolds here, he gestured to the female officer beside him, could serve at the highest levels. She is not a guest of the Navy, Commander. She is a pillar of it. You are not looking at a lost old woman. You are looking at a living legend. The weight of the Commodore's words settled over the room. The young SEALs looked from their disgraced team leader to the quiet woman in the corner with a newfound sense of awe and profound shame. They were warriors, but they were in the presence of something more, a pioneer who had fought battles they couldn't even imagine. Jensen stood rooted to the spot, his face ashen. Every ounce of his pride, his swagger, his certainty, had been stripped away, leaving him raw and exposed. Commodore Davies turned back to Jensen, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl that was far more terrifying than his shouting. Your arrogance, your blatant sexism, and your frankly disgusting ageism have brought shame upon my command and upon the uniform of the United States Navy. You see a woman, you see gray hair, and you fail to see the officer. You failed to apply the most basic standard of your profession. Assess your environment before you act. You assumed, and you have made an absolute fool of yourself and your team. He let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. You and your entire team will report to my office at 0500 for a formal reprimand. Following that, you will all be enrolled in a mandatory history and heritage program, with a special emphasis on the classified contributions of our service's pioneers. Perhaps learning about the giants whose shoulders you stand on will teach you some humility. He then turned his attention back to Phyllis, his expression softening immediately. Captain Carter, again I apologize. Phyllis finally stood up. She was not tall, but her posture, the quiet dignity she radiated, seemed to fill the room. She looked not at the Commodore, but at the pale, shaken Lieutenant Commander Jensen. Commodore, she said, her voice carrying an authority that needed no rank to enforce it. The reprimand is yours to give, but the lesson is mine. She walked slowly toward Jensen, who flinched as if expecting a blow. She stopped directly in front of him. You were right about one thing, Commander, she said, her voice even. Standards are everything. Don't you ever think I want you to soften them. The standards of your community were forged in blood and sacrifice, and they should be absolute, but they must be applied fairly, to everyone, regardless of gender or race or age. She tapped a finger on her own chest. Experience doesn't expire with youth. Courage doesn't fade with gray hair. This, she said, gesturing to her face, her hands, isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of survival. It means I've endured what broke other people. It means I've learned from mistakes you haven't even made yet. Your job is to see the warrior, not the wrapper they come in. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your pride is a tool. It pushes you to be better, faster, stronger. But tonight, you let it become a blindfold. Never let that happen again. As she spoke, the image of the worn metal coin on the table triggered one last sharp memory. It wasn't of the storm or the fire. It was the moment just before takeoff. The SEAL team leader, a young lieutenant with old eyes, had approached her on the flight deck. The wind was whipping so hard he had to shout to be heard over the screaming engines. He'd pressed something into her hand. If we don't make it back, he'd yelled, make sure they know we went down fighting. It wasn't a coin then. It was just a piece of jagged metal, a keepsake from a previous mission. It was a token of trust, a passing of the torch from the warrior on the ground to the warrior in the sky. She had closed her hand around it, the sharp edges digging into her palm, and nodded. It was her promise to bring them home, a promise she kept. A week later, the Sandpiper's perch was quiet. A new policy memo had been circulated through every command on base. It was an update to the Equal Opportunity Training curriculum, with a new mandatory block of instruction specifically addressing age-based bias and the historical contributions of previously unacknowledged female veterans. The memo was titled simply, The Torch 5 Directive. A new mentorship initiative was launched, connecting pioneer women of the service with the current generation of female officers and enlisted personnel, ensuring their stories would never again be forgotten. Lieutenant Commander Mark Jensen sat at a small coffee shop off base, nursing a cup of black coffee. He saw a flash of red tweed enter the shop and his stomach clenched. Phyllis Carter walked to the counter, ordered a tea, and then, seeing him, walked over to his table. "Commander," she said, her tone neutral. "Ma'am," he replied, standing up quickly. "Please, He gestured to the empty chair. She sat. For a moment they just sat in silence. "I wanted to apologize," Jensen said finally, his voice low and earnest. "Without my commanding officer present. Just me. What I did was inexcusable. There's no other word for it. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." Phyllis studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Apology accepted, Commander. The real question is, what did you learn?" "I learned," Jensen said, choosing his words carefully, "that I've been looking at the world through a keyhole. I saw what I expected to see. I didn't see what was actually there." "Good," she said simply. "That's a start." She picked up her tea. "I was your age once, you know, full of fire and certainty. I thought I knew everything about the world." She took a sip. "The world has a way of teaching you that you don't." She placed a hand on the table, her weathered fingers resting near his. "Don't lose the fire, Commander. Just learn to aim it better." She stood up, gave him a final nod, and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a hard-earned lesson in humility. He watched her go, a living piece of history walking into the morning sun, her red jacket a small, bright flame that refused to be extinguished. Thank you for joining us for another story from Veteran Valor. If you believe in honoring the trailblazers who served in silence, who broke barriers and built the legacy our modern military stands on, please like this video, subscribe to She Chose Valor, and share this story so that legends like Torch 5 are never forgotten.